The Emergency Committee for Israel, Brookings, Heritage, AIPAC, WINEP, JINSA, PNAC, CNAS, the AEI, FPI, CFR, and CSP. It sure does seem sometimes like the war party's got the foreign policy debate in D.C. all locked up. But not quite. Check out the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. They put America first, opposing our government's world empire, and especially their Middle Eastern madness. That's the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show here. I'm Scott Horton. My website is scotthorton.org. And you can find all my interview archives there, more than 2,700 of them now, going back to 2003. And you can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at /Scott Horton Show. All right, so our final guest on the show today is Phil Giraldi. He's a former CIA and DIA officer. Now he's the executive director of the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org, and he's contributing editor to the American Conservative magazine and a regular contributor to antiwar.com. Welcome back to the show, Phil. How the hell are you?
I'm fine, Scott. How about you?
I'm doing great. Appreciate you joining us today.
No problem.
All right, so now this is the part of the show where I beg and plead and try to direct everyone's attention to the American Conservative magazine, theamericanconservative.com, and this very important new piece, Who's Turning Syria's Civil War into a Jihad? And the first thing you do in this article is sort of lay the background of the last couple of years of somewhat, at least, so-called civil war in Syria and American involvement. So I was hoping if I gave you the chance, you could do the same for us today.
Well, I basically said that the U.S. and the Europeans, for their part, probably envisioned what they had envisioned in the case of Libya, a transformation from a dictatorship into some kind of pluralistic, democratic government form. However, the Turks, of course, had a different idea on all this. I mean, the Turks saw Syria purely in terms as a security issue for them because of the Kurdish separatists, the PKK, so they don't really care what kind of government wound up in Syria. All they wanted to do was to get a government that would be acquiescent to Turkish security needs, and I think that was their big objective. Meanwhile, there were other players, too, which we'll probably get into as we talk more about it. But the whole point was everybody kind of had a different agenda in terms of what they were trying to do, but the underlying concept was that Bashar Assad would roll over and surrender pretty much quickly and be replaced by some kind of government. And that, of course, is not what happened.
Yeah, it's amazing that they thought that, because I think those of us critics, if we went back a couple of years and checked the interviews, we'd see from the very beginning our assumption that this is not going to be like Libya at all. I mean, you had a very basic East versus West kind of thing there, very little anti-aircraft, so you could do a no-fly zone and all that kind of thing. And in Syria, it's a much bigger mess and precluded the things that made Libya, to paraphrase Paul Wolfowitz, doable.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, basically, Syria was a lot more complicated. I mean, it was a lot more complicated in every sense, in terms of the ethnic groups that make up the country, in terms of the actual power of the government. Syria has had for many years one of the better militaries in the Arab world, and all these things were kind of factors that I guess everybody assumed. Well, we put a little pressure, and it's going to happen. But of course, it never works that way.
Yep. It was funny, when I was reading your article, I actually thought of Paul Wolfowitz and then their plan for Iraq, right? Which they really did believe, well, we'll just do it with like 5,000 guys. We'll just parachute them in there. We'll do this little regime change. We'll put Chalabi right in power. They actually have a point, those neocons, when they say, we never wanted the entire State Department and entire military to take over Iraq for years and years and years. We just wanted to do a regime change real quick and go. And then everything was going to be fine. That's the part where they go off the rails. But that was really their plan. They thought that you could do it on the very light and fast and cheap like that.
Yeah, that's right, and this I think maybe even more so in terms of what we're looking at in Syria, because there was no real opposition in any serious way. The people that were pretending to be in opposition were in most cases expats, people that had left Syria years before and were ensconced in places like Washington, D.C. and Berlin, Germany. And these were the ones that the Europeans and the U.S. expected to be able to step in. It was very, and again, the Iraq example is perfect because it's very similar to Ahmad Chalabi and what was developed in Iraq.
Mm-hmm. And now, the escalation that's been announced lately, is that, do you think, going to change the game at all? I think in the article, you basically sound like Patrick Coburn saying this is a stalemate. Assad's not going anywhere now. Is this escalation going to change that?
I don't think so. I think it's a response to probably more domestic politics in the United States to do something, and by domestic politics I mean Congress and the media, because I don't think the people give a damn. And the fact is that look what basically Kerry is saying. He's saying we're gonna give them $60 million. I mean, that's a wheel on an F-35, I think. And we're going to give them $60 million to set up infrastructure to give food and medical care in the areas that they've overrun. But the fact is, there's no infrastructure in those areas they've overrun. And what infrastructure there is, it consists of groups that are hostile to each other. And so what is this? It's just $60 million. You might as well give it to me. I could give some of it to you and to anti-war, and at least we'd get something good out of it. But this is just going to be money thrown down a hole to make it look like something's being done.
So in a way, really, the historical comparison we need to look for here is the Bay of Pigs. The Americans have been encouraging these guys all along. They make all these motions like, hey, we recognize you as the legitimate government. Assad must go. No, you should not negotiate with Assad. You should hold out for a better day. But ultimately, you can all go die like the Shia in the desert in 1991.
Yeah, and right, you're absolutely right. And the thing is, it's even worse than the Bay of Pigs. At least the Bay of Pigs kind of had a unified structure. I mean, here we have a government or an alternative government that's being recognized by the U.S. and a lot of other countries, and it basically consists of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is the dominant element in it, but the dominant element in the fighting that's going on are the more radical groups that have been compared to Al Qaeda, not correctly or incorrectly, but nevertheless they're more radical. These are the people that want to reinstate the caliphate, to bring in Sharia law, and to basically expand what they're doing. And so you have those people actually doing the fighting, and meanwhile you have all these eggheads in Washington and Europe who don't know what's going on, and they're just throwing money at the problem.
All right, now, the Saudis and the Qataris. I'm lazy, and I'm a Texan, so I don't know nothing about it, so I just assume that they're working together, right? Aren't the Qataris just the sock puppets of the Saudis in the first place? But you're going to give me some better detail about that, I think.
Yeah, they're basically working together. They've been working together in a number of places. I have a piece coming out in the print edition of the American Conservative this week talking about what they've been up to in Egypt. And the fact is that the Saudis in particular are terrified by the Arab Spring. They see it as something that could spill over. They passionately dislike the Muslim Brotherhood and their own affinities with Wahhabism, their own brand of Sunni Muslim religion, is more closely defined by the radicals, by the Al Qaeda type people. And so what they've been doing is they've been rather than support the Muslim Brotherhood, they've been starving them of resources. They've been sending in money and weapons and that sort of thing. But it's all been going to the extremists. And this has been a deliberate policy by the Saudis. So again, the whole idea of what's going on in Syria, the right hand, which is perhaps the United States and Europe, doesn't know what the left hand is doing, which is to a certain extent the Turks and also the Saudis and the Qataris, who are pursuing their own agenda. They don't want to see a democratic, pluralist, Arab Spring type government in Syria. They want a Sunni regime that's conservative and will keep a lid on dissent.
Mm-hmm. Well, although I mean, I don't really, I guess, understand Syria well enough to know how this would work out. But can you tell me, do you think if they ever could get rid of Assad, would that mean the complete destruction of the Syrian state and they'd have to start over a whole new one? Or they could, somehow, I don't know, if they got a lucky hit on him or something, could they take over the government of Syria as it is and rule that? Because it sort of sounds like the Saudis aren't going to get what they're bargaining for any more than anybody else in this thing. Once Assad falls.
I think the problem is that Syria is an artificial construction anyway, and it's like neighboring Iraq. Syria has had a situation where the dominant political group has been a minority. So there's no natural successor in terms of somebody stepping in and taking over the government, because the security services and a lot of the army and a lot of the civil service and everything comes from the Alawite community, which is the minority community, and so there's nobody to step in. I think that's probably the best way to look at it. So what happens is that you pull out the government, and this artificial construction of the state kind of comes apart. And I think that's what we're going to see. I don't see how it can go any other way. And this, of course, is not good for anybody, because it creates a kind of an open playing field for anybody with a grievance, anybody who's pushing an agenda, to get involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I'm not too much of an optimist, but is there any chance that actually maybe they could just work it out and have some kind of parliament? I mean, Iraq is, you couldn't call it a liberal democracy, but I asked Patrick Coburn, could Maliki survive an attempt to cancel an election or something like that? And he said, no way. So there is, at least there's some kind of check and balance from the people there. Is it possible that kind of thing could take root in Syria or Libya, for that matter? And who knows what the hell's going on in Tripoli these days?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the question would have to be for Syria, who would play the caretaker role that the United States played with Iraq? And Turkey is the obvious candidate for that. But the Turks are hated by the Syrians, by Arabs in general. And,
and who wants to be taken care of like that anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If that's the path to democracy.
You don't have a caretaker to stand by and allow this process to develop. So that's I think Syria is quite different.
Well, and do you know what's going on in Libya? Do they have anything? I mean, is it just low-level wars between militias? Or, I mean, I hear basically silence as far as news reporting out of Libya, but that doesn't mean it's really calm there at all.
No, it isn't calm there, and basically the central government, such as it is in Tripoli, doesn't have any jurisdiction over Benghazi and other parts of the country. So it has come apart along traditional tribal lines. Libya was an artificial colonial construct too, and basically it's been there for a long time, but it essentially cobbles together about three major tribes, which are now essentially running their own shows.
Well, so that could actually, be an improvement, right? As long as you don't have a lot of people stuck on the wrong side of the lines and that kind of thing, let them spin off. No?
Yeah, that's quite true. There's no reason why that's not sustainable once they kind of settle down. Sure.
It probably takes more violence to hold them all together, assuming, that they can get along without holding long-term grudges and reprisals and whatever if they want to keep going. I don't know who's even reporting out of Libya, but I need to find them.
Well, there's not much coming into the Western media. You have to. This is one of the things, when you and me, we're bombarded with information all day long, and unless you're really focused on an issue and looking hard for it, a lot of these things just are not coming to the surface anymore.
Yeah, and I don't trust Juan Cole. He's CIA.
Well, he's not CIA, but he's an idiot.
All right. Well, he did some work for them or something. I don't know.
All right. Well, no, he was an outside consultant that was called in to. He never worked as a CIA officer in any real sense, but he's lately become a kind of Mr. Humanitarian Interventionism, as explained by a college professor. Unfortunately, because I used to have a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, I did too. But it was the Libya war too, where he got on board for that, and I thought, wow, really? So. The teacher learned nothing, huh? All right, that's funny.
Yeah, well.
All right, so now, you really think that Obama is not, doubling down in any real sense? I mean, when I read 60 million, I figure the real number is probably triple that, and it probably does include a hell of a lot of weapons. And after all, if the Saudis are sending in a bunch of arms, and isn't that America sending in the arms anyway? Because after all they have to do is tell the Saudis to stop, and they would, right? I mean, that's just like plausible deniability, it sounds like.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just saying, it sounds like plausible deniability that they're kind of outsourcing it to the Saudis. Like having the Israelis sell missiles to the Iranians in the 80s for us.
No, I don't think that's true here. I think the Saudis have been messing around in Syria for quite some time, and I think it's a Saudi operation. I think that Washington, from everything I hear, is very nervous about what's going on in Syria, and I think it is genuine that they're reluctant to supply any missiles or any upgrades in hardware. They certainly provided a lot of low-level hardware back about a year ago, but I think even that has stopped.
Mm-hmm. And then, so now you say that the Turks kind of, certainly public opinion in Turkey has turned against this intervention, but how much has the government's involvement changed? Because after all, the whole Free Syrian Army is based across the border in Turkey, right? Or it was?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think what it is that Erdogan is feeling considerable pressure from the public and the media about this war and the way it's being conducted. Because, again, he sold it in the beginning as something that had to be done for Turkey's security and also for humanitarian reasons. And, of course, he assured the people, as is always the case, that this was going to be over quickly. But it wasn't. And so he's under considerable pressure. I think he knows now he's got to figure out some way to bring about closure on this. But I don't think they've quite figured that out yet.
Hey, tell me what you think of John Kerry.
Well, I don't know. I like him. I think he's as close to being a realist as we're going to get in the current climate in Washington, just as probably Hagel will turn out to be. I kind of have good feelings about him. I especially since he ran against George Bush and he basically was smeared, that would incline me to think well of him.
Yeah, well, then again, he supported everything terrible that George Bush ever did in the Senate, right?
But it was bipartisan. They all supported it.
Yeah.
You could have counted, on 2 fingers, how many congressmen went against the flow? I mean, Ron Paul and Kucinich.
Yep. That's true. All right, hey, listen, I want to ask you about this other article that you did this week, this one for antiwar.com, Phil, The Outpost. It's a review of a book by Jake Tapper of ABC News, who, strangely, if I ever heard that guy's name, I would just roll my eyes. He's a TV news guy. What could he write that's valuable? Only this article sure makes it sound like his book is something else here.
Yeah, it's The Outpost is a story of an army base in Afghanistan, and he follows it through the course for about 5 or 6 years. And as I said in the review, it's not an anti-war book, and by any means, but the way it's told, it's in great detail. He interviewed the soldiers. He interviewed the families. He obviously talked to lots and lots of people. The book is almost 700 pages long, and he follows these soldiers. And basically, he said in the end of the book, he wanted to find out, what their lives were like while serving in this post, and why they did it, and how it affected them afterwards. And he certainly does that in great detail. This post was sited in a place that only an idiot would put a military base. It was overlooked on 3 sides by mountains. So that means that, you know, you can sort of shoot at it at will. And he chronicles the soldiers and officers who went to this post and died, and he tells in great detail how they died, how they got wounded, how they suffered, what their families went through afterwards, how they were hospitalized, and post-traumatic stress issues and stuff like that. So it's an amazing anti-war book, although it doesn't wrap itself in that kind of mode. It just does it because of what it tells.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's just amazing how, well, you know, look, I know you're just like me. As long as there's a war on, this is the most important thing in the world at all times. But society just keeps going on like it's peacetime. This is just how it is now. We just have a war in Afghanistan. We have had one this whole time. And nobody ever really stops to measure the cost of throwing these lives away for what? I mean, who could quantify a gain in Afghanistan other than maybe some heroin dealers benefit from it? Otherwise, as soon as we eventually leave, all of our interests that we've been propping up there fall apart anyway. It's all for nothing that they do this. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's the thing that got to me about the book. The fact is that, you know, you're going along with it, and the underlying current is that this was all for nothing, because they eventually shut down the base and abandoned it. So here you have these lives totally destroyed, and I'm not even talking about the hundreds and hundreds of Afghans who died in this process, because obviously Jake Tapper is a Washington journalist. He's not able to interview them or look at their emails or anything. So what focused this story for me was that one of the soldiers who was killed was a friend of my daughter. And he died particularly horribly, and the book tells the tale. And it's such a personal tragedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we talked about that at the time. You wrote an article before about him, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, a base in a valley surrounded by 3 cliff walls. I mean, come on. And you talk about it. It sounds like a chapter out of Catch-22. Where the colonel, if for whatever twisted reason, all his incentives are to send guys out to die for nothing, because then he gets a promotion later. That kind of ridiculous thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly the way it plays out. There's one episode in the book where this colonel, a real hardhead, insisted that they take this large army truck down this road that went to the base, and his junior officers were arguing with him, saying, "Look, this truck is 8 inches wider than the road, and it weighs 8 tons, and the road cannot possibly support that, and it's a death trip." But this guy wanted to look good for his superiors to get promoted, so he insisted they did it. They made the trip once, and then they tried it a second time, and it flipped off the road into a river, and it killed 2 American soldiers. So it's like, you know, these people should be tried as criminals that are behind these things and are responsible for these things, but they get promoted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're on the far side of the world from here. It's hard to keep people's attention on stuff like that. But it is just amazing, right, to think back about while all this was going on, we didn't know that, right? I mean, it really is that far away. We only find out after the fact. What do you mean they put their base at the bottom of a valley surrounded by enemies? And then, as you say in the article, I think some of the locals, they don't even know what Afghanistan means. They've never been to Afghanistan as far as they know, and they think that their enemies are the Russian communists still.
Yeah, that's right. They thought when the Americans arrived that they were the Russians.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And they wondered why. Well, why aren't we being allowed to fight them and drive them out? And well, that's of course the correct question, isn't it?
Yeah, thank God the Pentagon is keeping these people at bay. You know, I remember there was one in the New York Times about Yemen. This is in the New York Times. Well, it was the Weekend magazine. I don't know if they have a different editor or something, but anyway, it was about Yemen. And at the end, one of the tribesmen says, "I've never heard of Yemen. I don't know what Yemen means. All I know is I've got Allah in the sky, and I've got my local warlord down the street who I have to pay my tax to, and that's it. Otherwise, I'm just from this land, you know, that I live on top of." These are our enemies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we idealize the farmers who fought at Lexington and Concord, right? And that's what these people are doing. I mean, there's a foreign invader, a foreign force, and much more foreign than the British were to us in 1776 and 1775, and yet we can't quite understand why they're opposing us. Come on.
It's amazing. And it continues on. All right. Well, thanks very much, Phil. It's always great to talk to you.
Okay, Scott. Take care.
Appreciate it. Everybody, that's Phil Giraldi from the Council for the National Interest, the American Conservative Magazine, and antiwar.com. The Outpost is the latest at antiwar.com and at the American Conservative, whatever it's called, about Syria. Hey, ladies. Scott Horton here. If you would like truly youthful, healthy, and healthy-looking skin, there is one very special company you need to visit, Dagny & Lane at dagnyandlane.com. Dagny & Lane has revolutionized the industry with a full line of products made from organic and all-natural ingredients that penetrate deeply with nutrient-rich ionic minerals and antioxidants for healthy and beautiful skin. That's Dagny & Lane at dagnyandlane.com. And for a limited time, add promo code SCOTT15 at checkout for a 15% discount. Hey everybody, Scott Horton here. Ever think maybe your group should hire me to give a speech? Well, maybe you should. I've got a few good ones to choose from, including How to End the War on Terror, The Case Against War with Iran, Central Banking and War, Uncle Sam and the Arab Spring, The Ongoing War on Civil Liberties, and of course, Why Everything in the World is Woodrow Wilson's Fault. But I'm happy to talk about just about anything else you've ever heard me cover on the show as well. So check out youtube.com/Scott Horton Show for some examples, and email Scott at scotthorton.org for more details. See you there. Man, you need some Liberty stickers for the back of your truck. At LibertyStickers.com, they've got great state hate, like Pearl Harbor was an inside job. The Democrats want your guns. U.S. Army, die for Israel. Police brutality, not just for black people anymore. And government school, why you and your kids are so stupid. Check out these and 1,000 other great ones at LibertyStickers.com. And of course, they'll take care of all your custom printing for your band or your business at TheBumperSticker.com. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey everybody, Scott Horton here, inviting you to check out the Future Freedom Foundation at FFF.org. They've got a brand new website with new and improved access to more than 20 years worth of essays promoting the cause of liberty. And FFF's writers, including Jacob Hornberger, Jim Bovard, Sheldon Richmond, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and more, aren't just good. They're the best at opposing and discrediting our corrupt overlords in Washington and their warfare, welfare, regulatory police state. That's the Future Freedom Foundation's new and improved site at FFF.org. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here, inviting you to check out WallStreetWindow.com. It's a financial blog written by former hedge fund manager Mike Swanson, who's investing in commodities, mining stocks, and European markets. Wall Street Window is unique in that Mike shows people what he's really investing in and updates you when he buys or sells in his main account. Mike thinks his positions are going to go up because of all the money the Federal Reserve is printing to finance the deficit. See what happens at WallStreetWindow.com. And Mike's got a great new book coming out, so also keep your eye on writer MichaelSwanson.com for more details.